Clara's fingers were blue when she finally stopped digging. 3 years of scraping frozen soil to bury what little hope she had left. But this time, she wasn't digging a grave. She was pulling a dying man out of one. "Mama, is he dead like Papa?" Her daughter's voice cut through the howling wind. Clara looked at the stranger's face, blood frozen on his temple lips already turning white, and made the choice that would destroy everything she had built, or save it. Subscribe now and follow this story to the very end. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this journey reaches.
Datang.
The stranger's hand shot up and grabbed Clara's wrist before she could check if he was breathing. "Don't let them find me!" His eyes were wild, unfocused, the blue of them so pale they looked like frozen water. Then they rolled back and his grip went slack, and Clara Thornton was left kneeling in the snow behind her dress shop with a half-dead man and 2 children who had already seen too much death for their young years. "Mama." Samuel's voice cracked, 9 years old and trying so hard to sound like a man. "Mama, what do we do?" Clara pressed her fingers against the stranger's neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. "We get him inside." "But Mama." "Now, Samuel." Grace stood frozen by the back door, her rag doll clutched to her chest thumb, hovering near her mouth, a habit Clara thought she'd broken months ago. The 5-year-old's eyes were fixed on the blood spreading through the snow like spilled ink. "Gracie, go inside and pull the blankets off my bed. Put them by the stove. Can you do that for Mama?" Grace didn't move. "Grace Elizabeth Thornton." The sharpness in Clara's voice broke through. Grace nodded once and disappeared inside her small boots, leaving prints in the fresh powder. "He's too big," Samuel said, already positioning himself at the man's shoulders. "We can't carry him." "Then we drag him." Clara had dragged her husband's body through snow once. William, who had coughed blood for 3 months, while she pretended not to notice who had worked himself to death in the mines, so she could open this shop, who had died owing Cornelius Wade more money than she could earn in 10 years. She knew how to move dead weight through winter. "Grab under his arms. I'll take his feet. We go slow." The stranger was heavy, tall, and broad-shouldered, wearing clothes too fine for the back alleys of Redstone. His coat alone probably cost more than everything Clara owned. But it was torn now, splattered with blood, that wasn't all from the wound on his head. Someone had beaten this man, beaten him badly, and left him to freeze. "On 3, Clara said. 1, 2, 3. They moved. It took them 15 minutes to drag him 20 feet. Clara's back screamed. Samuel's face turned red with effort. But they got him through the back door of the shop, past the bolts of fabric and half-finished dresses, into the small living quarters where Clara and her children had existed, not existed since William died. "On the bed?" Clara ordered. "But that's your bed, Mama." "And now it's his until he's well enough to leave. Help me." They lifted Clara, taking most of the weight, and rolled the stranger onto her narrow mattress. He groaned a sound that was somehow reassuring. Dead men didn't groan. "Samuel, bolt the front door. Check the windows." "You think someone's coming for him?" Clara looked at the man's battered face. Strong jaw, dark hair matted with blood hands that bore calluses, despite his expensive clothes. A working man dressed like a rich one. Or a rich man who hadn't forgotten how to work. "I think someone wanted him dead. I think they might come to finish the job." Samuel's eyes went wide, but he nodded and ran to check the doors. 9 years old, and already he understood that danger didn't knock before entering. Grace appeared at Clara's elbow, blankets dragging on the floor behind her. "Is he going to die like Papa?" Clara's heart cracked. A small fissure, but she felt it. "No, baby. Mama won't let that happen." "You said that about Papa, too." Clara had no answer for that. She took the blankets and tucked them around the stranger, then set water to boil on the stove. She would need to clean that wound, check for other injuries, figure out who this man was and why someone had tried to kill him in the alley behind her shop. But first, "Grace, I need you to do something very important. Can you be a big girl for Mama? Grace nodded solemnly. I need you to watch this man. If he wakes up, if he tries to move you, come get me immediately. Don't talk to him. Don't get close. Just watch and come get me. Can you do that? Like a guard. Exactly like a guard. Grace positioned herself on a stool by the door, her doll held like a weapon, and fixed her eyes on the unconscious stranger with the fierce concentration only a 5-year-old could muster. Clara found Samuel standing by the front window, peering through a crack in the curtains. See anything? 2 men, Samuel whispered, standing by the general store. They keep looking this way. Clara's stomach tightened. She moved beside her son and looked. 2 figures in heavy coats, hats pulled low. Not locals, she knew everyone in Redstone by sight, even if most of them had stopped acknowledging her existence after the gossip started. These men were strangers, and they were definitely watching her shop. Samuel, listen to me carefully. You know the back path through Miller's orchard, the one you're not supposed to take. A guilty flush crept up her son's neck. Maybe. I need you to take that path to Reverend Abbott's house. Tell him we have trouble. Tell him to come quickly and to come alone. What about you and Grace? We'll be fine. Your father's rifle is under my bed. Samuel's face went pale. You know how to use it. Clara thought of all the things she'd learned since William died. How to stretch a dollar until it screamed. How to smile at women who called her a charity case behind her back. How to pretend she didn't hear the whispers about the poor Thornton widow who couldn't even afford to keep her husband alive. I know how to protect my children. Go. Now. Stay off the main roads. Samuel hesitated, then threw his arms around her waist in a quick, fierce hug. Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping out the back door into the gathering dusk. Clara returned to the stranger's bedside. Grace hadn't moved from her post. Any change? He talks in his sleep, Grace reported. He said Margaret and Lily. Is Margaret his wife? Clara felt something shift in her chest. Margaret. A woman's name spoken with the desperate tenderness of loss. Maybe baby. We'll ask him when he wakes up. Is he going to wake up? Clara studied the man's face. Beneath the blood and bruises, she could see fine lines around his eyes, the weathered tan of someone who spent his days outdoors. Not a townsman, a rancher maybe, or a farmer, someone who worked the land. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he does. She worked quickly, cutting away his coat to check for hidden wounds. His shirt beneath was soaked with blood, but when she pulled it open, apologizing silently for the impropriety, she found mostly bruises. Deep ones, the kind that came from boots and fists, but nothing that would kill him if she could get him warm enough. The wound on his head was the worst. Someone had hit him with something hard and heavy, splitting the skin to the bone. She cleaned it with hot water and whiskey, the bottle William had kept for emergencies, and she had never touched then, wrapped it tight with strips torn from her only spare sheet. The stranger's eyes fluttered once during the process. He muttered something that sounded like papers and don't let them before slipping back into unconsciousness. Papers. Important enough to kill, for Clara searched his pockets and found them in his inner coat, a leather pouch wrapped in oilcloth heavy with documents. She didn't open it. Whatever secrets this man carried were not hers to know. But someone wanted them badly enough to leave him for dead. A knock at the front door made her freeze. Mama! Grace's voice trembled. Stay with him, Gracie. Don't make a sound. Clara retrieved William's rifle from under the bed, checking that it was loaded the way he had taught her years ago, before the coughing started, before the bills piled up, before Cornelius Wade came calling with his sympathetic smile and his paperwork that somehow always favored him. She approached the front door on silent feet. Who's there? Mrs. Thornton. A woman's voice, high and nasal. It's Harriet Crenshaw. Open this door immediately. Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. Harriet Crenshaw ran the general store with her husband. She was also the biggest gossip in Redstone, and the woman who had refused to sell Clara flour last week because, We don't extend credit to certain people anymore. What do you want, Mrs. Crenshaw? I saw you dragging something through the snow behind your shop, something that looked distinctly like a body. A pause loaded with accusation. What are you hiding in there? Nothing that concerns you. Everything in this town concerns me, Mrs. Thornton. Open this door, or I'll fetch the sheriff. Clara closed her eyes. She could picture it perfectly, Harriet running to Sheriff Morgan, who was deeply indebted to Cornelius Wade. The sheriff coming to investigate. The stranger being found in her bed. The scandal erupting. What little reputation she had left burning to ash. And yet, she opened the door. Harriet Crenshaw stood on the step, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat that probably cost more than Clara earned in 3 months. Her sharp eyes immediately tried to peer past Clara into the shop. Well, what have you got to say for yourself? A man was beaten and left to die behind my property. Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. I brought him inside to keep him from freezing. That's what any Christian would do. Harriet's eyebrows shot up. A man in your home with your children present. Would you have preferred I let him die? I would have preferred you exercise some propriety. Harriet's voice rose to a pitch that probably carried halfway down the street. A widow alone with a strange man in her bed. He's unconscious and bleeding, Mrs. Crenshaw. I hardly think he's a threat to my virtue. It's not about what he does. It's about what people will say. Harriet leaned closer, her breath fogging in the cold air. Your reputation is already hanging by a thread, Clara Thornton. Your husband left you with nothing but debts and 2 children you can barely feed. The only reason anyone still buys your dresses is Christian charity. And now you bring a strange man into your home on display for anyone to see. Clara's hand tightened on the rifle still hidden behind the door. Then perhaps you should leave so people have nothing to see. I should, Harriet sputtered. How dare you speak to me? My children are cold, Mrs. Crenshaw. There's a man dying in my home who needs attention. You've made your opinion clear. Now if you'll excuse me. She closed the door in Harriet's face. For a moment, she stood with her back against the wood heart-pounding rifle clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Mama, Grace's voice drifted from the back room. The man's eyes are open. Clara set down the rifle and hurried to the bedroom. The stranger was awake. Barely. His eyes struggled to focus, moving from the ceiling to the walls to Grace's small face, watching him from her stool. Where? His voice was gravel and broken glass. Where am I? Clara moved into his line of sight. My dress shop, in Redstone, Wyoming territory. My children found you in the alley behind the building. His eyes found hers, held them. Something passed between them, recognition maybe, or simply the acknowledgement of one survivor to another. They were going to kill me. Who? Cornelius Wade's men. The name sent ice through Clara's veins. They took everything. My horse, my money. They thought they took the papers too. His hand moved weakly toward his chest, where she had removed his coat. The land documents, the water rights. Are they safe? Clara said. I found them. I didn't look inside. Relief washed over his battered features. Thank you. His eyes closed, then opened with effort. I'm Thomas Caldwell. I own the ranch north of here. Clara knew the name. Everyone in the valley knew the name. Thomas Caldwell owned the second largest spread in the territory. His land controlled access to the main water source for half the farms in the region. Cornelius Wade had been trying to buy him out for years. You're far from home, Mr. Caldwell. I was going to Helena, land office. Had to file papers before Wade found a way to invalidate them. A bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Didn't make it very far. No, Clara agreed. You didn't. The men who attacked me, they'll come looking when they realize I'm not dead. I know. You should turn me out. His eyes searched her face. "You have children. You can't afford to get mixed up in my troubles with Wade." Clara thought of the foreclosure notice hidden in her sewing basket, the bank letter that gave her 30 days to pay William's remaining debt or lose everything. The signature at the bottom of that letter, Cornelius Wade, President, Redstone First Bank. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, "I'm already mixed up with Wade. Have been since my husband died and Wade started buying every piece of paper with our name on it." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "He's coming for your land too. My shop, my home, everything I have." She straightened the blanket over his chest with hands that didn't quite tremble. "He'll own this whole valley before he's done." "Not if I can stop him. You can barely lift your head. Give me a few days." "You might not have a few days. Mrs. Crenshaw just left. By morning, everyone in Redstone will know you're here. By afternoon, Wade will know too." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then I'll leave tonight." "You'll die if you leave tonight." "I'll die if I stay." "Maybe." Clara stood suddenly exhausted, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. "Or maybe we find another way." She looked at this stranger in her bed, battered, bleeding, hunted, and saw herself reflected back. Two people caught in Cornelius Wade's web, struggling to survive, losing everything piece by piece. You have something Wade wants. I have something he needs. Perhaps together we're harder to destroy than apart. Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You don't know me. I know you didn't die when they tried to kill you. That's a start." The ghost of a smile crossed his damaged face. "You always take in strays, Mrs. Thornton. Only the ones who show up bleeding in my alley." She moved toward the door. "Rest now. I'll check on you in an hour." "Mrs. Thornton," she paused. "Thank you for taking the risk." Clara thought of William, who had taken risk after risk trying to provide for them, who had worked himself into an early grave while she pretended everything was fine. She thought of Samuel racing through the cold to fetch help. She thought of Grace standing guard over a stranger with nothing but a rag doll and fierce 5-year-old determination. We all take risks, Mr. Caldwell. The question is whether they're worth taking. She left him to sleep and found Grace still on her stool, still watching, still clutching her doll. "Is he a good man, Mama?" Clara gathered her daughter into her arms. Grace was getting too big for this, but she didn't protest, just buried her face in Clara's neck the way she used to when she was smaller and the world was kinder. "I don't know, baby. We just met him. Papa was a good man." "Yes, Papa was the best man." "He died anyway." Clara's throat closed. "Yes," she managed. "He did." "Will the hurt man die too?" "Not if I can help it." Grace pulled back, her small face serious. "Then help it, Mama. I don't want to dig another grave." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Her 5-year-old daughter, who had watched her father waste away, who had stood beside a hole in the frozen ground, while a pine box was lowered into the earth, who had asked every night for a month when Papa was coming home. "I won't let that happen," Clara promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I won't." A commotion at the back door made them both jump. Clara pushed Grace behind her and grabbed the rifle just as the door burst open. Samuel tumbled through, red-faced and gasping, Reverend Josiah Abbott close behind. The old minister's white hair was wild from the wind, his spectacles fogged, but his eyes were sharp as they took in the scene. "Clara, child. Samuel tells me there's trouble. In the bedroom, a man named Thomas Caldwell. Someone tried to kill him." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "Caldwell, the rancher. You know him, know of him. Good reputation, honest dealer. Been fighting Wade's expansion for years." The Reverend moved toward the bedroom without waiting for invitation. "Let me see what we're dealing with." Clara followed, leaving Samuel to lock the door behind them. In the bedroom, Thomas had fallen back into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. Reverend Abbott examined him with surprising competence. "You've done well," he said, checking Clara's bandaging. The bleeding stopped. Fever's a risk, but if he makes it through the night, he has a chance. Harriet Crenshaw came by. She saw me bring him in. The Reverend sighed. Of course she did. That woman could find scandal in a Sunday sermon. He straightened, old joints creaking. The town will talk. The town already talks. This will make it worse. A widow, a strange man, your reputation. I know what they'll say. Clara's voice was harder than she intended. They've been saying it since William died, and I didn't have the decency to throw myself on his grave. I'm past caring about whispers, Reverend. Abbott studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. You've changed, Clara Thornton. Losing everything you love tends to do that. Not everything. He gestured toward the front room where Samuel and Grace were visible through the doorway, sitting close together on the floor, Samuel reading to his sister from a battered picture book. Not yet. Clara watched her children, her everything, her reason for getting out of bed each morning, for forcing her fingers to sew until they bled, for smiling at people who looked right through her. Wade wants my shop, she said quietly. The bank note comes due in 30 days. I don't have the money. I know. If I lose the shop, I lose everything. The children have nowhere to go. I know that too. Clara turned to face the minister. This man Caldwell, he has something Wade wants. Papers that could stop Wade from controlling all the water in the valley. You think there's an opportunity here? I think two people drowning might survive if they hold on to each other instead of going down alone. Reverend Abbott was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows, driving snow against the glass. Winter was settling in for the night, cold and relentless. What do you need from me? He finally asked. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The first person to ask her that question in 3 years. The first person to offer help without strings attached, without judgment, without the weight of obligation. I need someone to believe I'm doing the right thing, even if it doesn't look like it. The old minister placed his weathered hand on her shoulder. Clara Thornton. I've watched you bury your husband, raise your children alone, and face down every hardship this town has thrown at you with your head high. If you say bringing this man in was right, I believe you. Even if it ruins me. Doing the right thing often does. He squeezed her shoulder gently. But I'd rather stand beside someone who chose righteousness over convenience than someone who never chose at all. A crash from the front room shattered the moment. Grace screamed. Samuel shouted something Clara couldn't make out. She was moving before she finished thinking, rifle in hand, bursting into the front room to find her son standing between his sister and the front door, a chair held in his small hands like a weapon. The door was open. Snow swirled in, and standing on the threshold, backlit by the dying light, was a man Clara didn't recognize. Tall, broad, a star pinned to his chest. Mrs. Thornton? His voice was cold as the wind behind him. Sheriff Morgan sent me. We heard you're harboring a fugitive. A fugitive? Clara kept her voice steady, kept the rifle lowered but visible. I'm harboring a man who was beaten half to death and left to freeze. Last I checked, that wasn't a crime. The man you're harboring is wanted for questioning. Something about stolen property. Stolen from whom? The deputy's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Wade has filed a complaint. Says this man, Thomas Caldwell, took documents that rightfully belong to the Redstone First Bank. How convenient, Clara said. A man gets beaten in my alley, and suddenly he's the criminal. You want to explain why you're interfering with an official investigation, Mrs. Thornton. You want to explain why you're threatening a widow and her children over a sick man who can barely open his eyes? The deputy's hand drifted toward his holster. Samuel stepped forward, chair still raised, positioning himself between the deputy and his mother. Don't you touch my mama! 9 years old, voice shaking, standing his ground anyway. The deputy looked at the boy, then at Clara, then at the rifle in her hands. Behind him, Clara could see shapes moving in the darkness. More men. Wade's men probably wearing badges to make it legal. "You have until morning," the deputy said finally. "Hand over Caldwell or face the consequences." "And what consequences would those be?" His smile widened. "Mrs. Thornton, you owe Mr. Wade a considerable debt. It would be a shame if that debt suddenly became due immediately. Sheriff's auction could have you out of this building by week's end." Clara's blood ran cold. Her shop, her children's home, everything she had sacrificed to keep. "Get out." "Until morning, Mrs. Thornton. Think carefully about your choices." He backed away, leaving the door open, letting the cold pour in as he disappeared into the night. Clara stood, frozen rifle growing heavy in her arms as the snow settled on her floor, and her children pressed close to her sides, and somewhere in the back room, a stranger, who might be her salvation or her destruction, lay fighting for his life. "Mama." Grace's voice was small. "Are the bad men going to take our house?" Clara looked down at her daughter. At her son, still holding that ridiculous chair, still ready to fight. At everything she had left in the world. "No, baby," she said, her voice finding steel she didn't know she possessed. "Nobody's taking anything from us. Not anymore." She closed the door against the cold, bolted it with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and turned to face whatever came next. Behind her in the bedroom, Thomas Caldwell opened his eyes. He had heard everything, and he knew exactly what he had to do. Thomas Caldwell pushed himself upright before Clara could stop him. Pain exploded through his skull, turning his vision white at the edges, but he gritted his teeth and forced his body to cooperate. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to lie down." "I heard what he said." Thomas's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Wade's using me to destroy you." Clara stood in the bedroom doorway, her children pressed against her sides like small shadows. The rifle still hung in her hand, and Thomas noticed she held it like someone who knew how to use it, but hoped she never would. "That's not your concern." "The hell it isn't." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to send him back down. "You saved my life. I won't repay that by watching Wade burn yours to the ground. You can barely stand. Then I'll crawl if I have to." Something flickered across Clara's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a stubbornness that matched her own. "Mama." The boy, Samuel Thomas remembered, stepped forward. "He's right. If Wade takes our shop because of him, then he owes us." "Samuel, Papa always said a man pays his debts." Samuel's chin lifted, and Thomas saw the ghost of another man in that gesture. A man who had taught his son about honor before leaving him too soon. "If Mr. Caldwell is an honorable man, he'll help us." Thomas met the boy's eyes. 9 years old, carrying weight that would crush most grown men. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was." "Then I'll try to be worthy of the comparison." Thomas turned to Clara. "The papers I was carrying, the water rights documents, Wade needs them to control the valley. Without them, his entire expansion plan falls apart. And with them, every farmer and rancher in this region has legal access to the watershed. Wade can't squeeze anyone out, can't force sales, can't foreclose on loans because people can't water their crops." Thomas paused, letting the implications sink in. "Including yours." Clara's expression didn't change, but Thomas saw her grip tighten on the rifle. "You're saying those papers could save my shop?" "I'm saying those papers could save everyone Wade has been trying to destroy." Thomas forced himself to his feet, one hand bracing against the wall as the room tilted. "Including the woman who pulled me out of the snow when she could have let me die." "I don't need charity." "Good, because I'm not offering any." Thomas took a step toward her, then another, proving to himself, as much as to her, that he could still move. "I'm offering a partnership. You know this town. You know who Wade has hurt, who might stand against him if they had a reason. I have the legal ammunition to take him down, but I need time to recover, and allies to help me use it. You want me to be your ally. I want you to help me destroy the man who's been destroying you." Silence stretched between them. In the front room, Reverend Abbott had risen from his chair, watching the exchange with keen interest. Grace still clutched her doll eyes, moving between her mother and the stranger, like she was watching a tennis match she didn't quite understand. "Mama?" Grace's small voice broke the tension. "Is the hurt man going to help us keep our house?" Clara looked at her daughter, at her son, at the rifle in her hands, and the four walls that were all that stood between her children and the winter cold. "Maybe, baby." She set the rifle against the wall and turned to face Thomas fully. "What exactly do you propose, Mr. Caldwell?" "First, I need to get word to my ranch. My foreman Nathan, he's deaf, but he's the smartest man I know. He can bring men, supplies, legal support if we need it. Wade's deputies are watching the roads." "Then we don't use the roads." Thomas looked at Samuel. "Your mother mentioned you know paths through the woods, hidden ones." Samuel straightened. "I know every trail within 10 miles of here. Papa taught me." "Samuel, absolutely not." Clara stepped between Thomas and her son. "He's 9 years old. I'm almost 10. You are not going out there with Wade's men looking for any excuse to—" "Mrs. Thornton." Reverend Abbott's calm voice cut through the argument. "Might I suggest a compromise?" Clara turned to the minister, and Thomas saw exhaustion beneath her defiance. How long had this woman been fighting alone? How many battles had she won through sheer force of will? "I may be old," Abbott continued, "but I still remember the paths through Miller's orchard, and Wade's men won't stop a minister on church business." "Reverend, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." The old man smiled. "Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to visit the Caldwell Ranch. I hear they have excellent apple cider." Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. Allies. For the first time since the ambush, he wasn't completely alone. "Nathan will know what to do when you arrive. Tell him Thomas is alive and that the papers are safe. He'll handle the rest." Abbott nodded and moved toward the door. "I'll leave at first light. Less suspicious that way." "Reverend?" Clara's voice stopped him. "Thank you. Save your thanks for when we've one child." He opened the door, then paused. "And Clara, whatever happens, know that you've done the right thing. Some battles are worth fighting even when the cost is high." He disappeared into the night, leaving Clara alone with a wounded stranger and 2 children who had already seen too much of life's cruelty. Thomas's strength gave out without warning. One moment he was standing, the next his knees buckled and he was falling. Clara caught him before he hit the floor, her shoulder wedging under his arm, taking his weight with a grunt of effort. "Samuel, help me." Together, mother and son guided Thomas back to the bed. His head pounded with each heartbeat, and he could feel the fever building in his blood, but he forced his eyes to stay open. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I'm not usually this useless. You were beaten half to death 12 hours ago. I'd say you're doing remarkably well." "Flatterer." Clara's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Rest, Mr. Caldwell. We have until morning to figure out our next move." "Thomas." "What?" "Call me Thomas. If we're going to be partners, Mr. Caldwell seems unnecessarily formal." Clara hesitated. In the doorway, Grace had appeared again, watching with solemn eyes. "Mama, can I give the hurt man? Can I give Thomas my doll? She helps when things hurt." Thomas looked at the small girl, at the ragged doll clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Something cracked open in his heart. A door he'd sealed shut 5 years ago, when he'd buried his wife and daughter on the same cold morning. "That's very kind of you, Grace, but I think your doll needs to stay with you tonight. You've both been very brave." Grace considered this. "Okay, but if you get scared, you can borrow her. Mama says it's okay to be scared sometimes. Your mama is very wise." Grace nodded as if this were obvious and retreated to the front room with her brother. Clara watched them go, and Thomas saw the tension in her shoulders, the weight she carried that never quite lifted. "They're good children. They're my whole world." I had a daughter. The words came out before Thomas could stop them. Lily. She would have been Grace's age. Clara turned back to face him. Waiting. Not pushing. She died with her mother. 5 years ago. Fire took them both while I was away on business. Thomas stared at the ceiling, unable to meet Clara's eyes. I've spent every day since then trying to build something that would make their deaths mean something. Expanding the ranch, fighting Wade, protecting other families from losing what I lost. Did it help? No. The admission cost him more than the wounds Wade's men had inflicted. Nothing helps. You just learn to carry the weight. Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she sat on the edge of the bed close enough that Thomas could feel the warmth of her presence, but not touching. My husband coughed blood for 3 months before he died. Every night I heard him trying to muffle the sound so the children wouldn't know. Every morning I watched him drag himself to the mines because we needed the money. I knew he was dying. I pretended I didn't. Her voice was steady, but Thomas heard the fractures beneath. When he finally collapsed, when Dr. Morrison told me there was nothing to be done, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved. She laughed, a sound without humor. Isn't that terrible? My husband was dying, and part of me was relieved because it meant I could stop pretending. That's not terrible. That's human. The town didn't see it that way. Widow Thornton, who didn't cry enough at the funeral, who opened her shop the very next week because bills don't stop for grief, who dresses her children in clothes she makes from scraps because she can't afford new fabric. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. They've been waiting for me to fail. Some of them are probably hoping this situation gives them the excuse they've been looking for. Then we don't give them that excuse. Clara looked at him. How? By surviving. By winning. Thomas reached out, covering her hands with his own. His skin was still too cold, his grip weaker than he would have liked, but the gesture seemed to steady something in both of them. Wade thinks he can crush anyone who stands alone. Let's show him what happens when people stand together. The night passed slowly. Clara dozed in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake at every sound, every shift in the wind. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever rising and falling like a tide. At some point, Grace appeared with a cup of water, helping Thomas drink with the solemn concentration of a child playing doctor. Samuel brought firewood, building up the flames without being asked, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone used to caring for others. When dawn finally grayed the windows, Clara was already awake, already planning. "The fever's breaking," she said, pressing her palm to Thomas's forehead. "That's good. You might actually live. Your bedside manner needs work." "My bedside manner kept you alive. Be grateful." Thomas laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. Point taken. A knock at the front door silenced them both. Clara moved toward it with the rifle, gesturing for the children to stay back. "Who's there?" "It's Harriet Crenshaw, and the Reverend, and others." Clara exchanged a glance with Thomas, then unbolted the door. Harriet Crenshaw stood on the step, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Reverend Abbott, who should have been on his way to the Caldwell Ranch. And behind him a crowd. 20 people at least, maybe more, filling the street in front of Clara's shop. "Mrs. Crenshaw." Clara kept her voice neutral. "I wasn't expecting company." "No, I don't suppose you were." Harriet's face was unreadable. "May we come in?" "That depends on why you're here." Reverend Abbott stepped forward. "Clara, something happened last night. Something that changes things." "What kind of something?" "Wade's men burned the Thompson farm." A new voice, rough with anger. Clara recognized John Peterson, whose small homestead bordered hers. "Burned it to the ground while the family slept. The Thompsons barely got out alive." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Martha Thompson, the children, safe. Scared, but safe." Peterson's jaw tightened. It was a warning to anyone thinking about standing against Wade. "And you're here because..." Harriet Crenshaw spoke again, and this time, Clara heard something she'd never expected: shame. "We're here because we've been cowards. We've watched Wade squeeze this town dry for years. We've turned our backs on neighbors who needed help. We've—" She broke off, looking at Clara with eyes that glistened. "We've treated you shamefully, Clara Thornton, and I'm sorry." Clara stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to an apology she'd never thought she'd receive. "We heard about the man you took in," Harriet continued. "Heard about Wade's deputy threatening you. And we heard what the Reverend told us this morning about the papers your guest was carrying." "You told them?" Clara turned to Abbott. "I told them the truth. That Thomas Caldwell has legal documents that could break Wade's stranglehold on this valley. That you saved his life at risk to your own. That Wade is coming for you next, and if we let him take you, none of us are safe." John Peterson stepped forward. "We've lost enough, Mrs. Thornton. Watched enough of our neighbors get crushed under Wade's boot. If there's a chance to fight back, we want in." "What about my reputation?" Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Yesterday I was a scarlet woman for bringing a man into my home. Today you want to be my allies." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several people looked away. "You're right to be angry." Harriet's voice was quiet. "We've earned every bit of your scorn, but our shame doesn't change the facts. Wade is a threat to all of us, and you and Mr. Caldwell, you might be the only ones who can stop him." Clara felt Thomas's presence before she heard him. He had managed to get out of bed, was leaning heavily against the doorframe to the bedroom, pale but determined. "She's right," he said, "and she's wrong." Everyone turned to look at him. "You haven't earned Mrs. Thornton's scorn. You've earned her contempt." Thomas's voice was stronger than it had any right to be. "You abandoned her when she needed you, gossiped about her when she struggled, made her children feel like pariahs because their mother had the audacity to survive without a man." The crowd shifted again. Clara saw shame deepen on several faces. "But here's the thing about contempt." Thomas straightened, and despite his injuries, there was something commanding in his presence. "It can be overcome. Not with words, with actions. You want to stand against Wade Good. Prove it. Not to me, to her. To the woman you failed." Silence stretched. Then Harriet Crenshaw did something Clara would never forget. She stepped forward, took Clara's hands in her own, and looked her in the eye. "I refused to sell you flour last week. Said I didn't extend credit to certain people. I knew you needed it. I knew your children were hungry. And I turned you away because I was petty and small and afraid of what people would think if I helped the Thornton widow." Tears slid down Harriet's weathered cheeks. "I can't undo that, but I can promise you it won't happen again. And I can promise that whatever comes next, I'll stand beside you instead of against you." Clara stared at the woman who had been her chief tormentor for 3 years. The woman whose whispers had cost Clara customers, whose judgment had isolated her from the community, whose cruelty had made Grace ask why the other children weren't allowed to play with her. "Why now?" Clara's voice cracked. "Why today, after everything?" "Because last night when the Thompsons' barn was burning, I saw what we've become, what I've become. A town so scared of one man that we'd let our neighbors burn rather than stand up." Harriet's grip tightened on Clara's hands. "Your husband worked himself to death trying to provide for you, and when he died, instead of helping his widow, we made her life harder. What does that say about us?" Clara had no answer. Neither did anyone else. "Mama!" Grace's small voice cut through the tension. She had crept forward, was standing at Clara's knee, looking up at the crowd with wide eyes. "Are these people going to be nice to us now?" The question, so simple and so devastating, hung in the cold air. Harriet Crenshaw knelt down, bringing herself to Grace's level. "We're going to try, sweetheart. We're going to try very hard." Clara made her decision. "Come inside, all of you. If we're going to fight Wade, we need a plan." The shop was too small for 20 people, but they crammed in anyway. Those who couldn't fit stood at the door, straining to hear. Thomas had settled into a chair by the stove, still pale but alert. The papers from his coat spread on the table before him. "These are the water rights documents," he explained. "Legal claims to the North Valley watershed filed by my father 30 years ago and upheld by the territorial court ever since. Wade's been trying to invalidate them for years." "Why does he want them so badly?" John Peterson asked. "Because whoever controls the water controls everything. Every farm, every ranch, every business in this valley depends on that watershed. If Wade can claim it, he can charge whatever he wants for access, and anyone who can't pay loses everything." Peterson's voice was grim. Like the Hendersons last spring, they couldn't afford Wade's fees and suddenly their crops died. That wasn't an accident. Thomas's jaw tightened. Wade diverted the water deliberately, killed their harvest to force a sale. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. "So what do we do?" Harriet asked. "Wade has the sheriff in his pocket. He has men with guns. What do we have?" "We have the law." Thomas tapped the papers. "These documents prove Wade has no legal claim to the watershed. If we can get them to the territorial judge and Helena, Wade's entire operation falls apart. Helena's 3 days' ride. Wade will have men on every road." "Then we don't use the roads," Clara spoke up. "Thomas the Reverend was supposed to—" "I'm too old and too slow," Abbott interrupted. "Wade's men would catch me before I made it 10 miles, but these papers don't need to go to Helena. They need to go somewhere closer first." "Where?" "The newspaper office in Millbrook. Harry Foster runs it. He's been writing about Wade's corruption for years. If he publishes these documents, the whole territory will know the truth." Abbott smiled grimly. "And once the truth is out, even Wade can't stop it." "Millbrook's 40 miles east," Peterson said. "Still a long ride through Wade's territory." "Not if you know the back trails." Samuel's voice, thin but determined, cut through the adult conversation. "I can do it. I can do. Papa showed me paths that nobody else knows. I can get there in a day if I ride fast." "Absolutely not." Clara's response was immediate. "Mama, you are 9 years old, Samuel. I am not sending you on a 40-mile journey with men trying to kill anyone who carries those papers. But I'm the only one who knows the trails. Then you'll teach someone else." Thomas held up a hand, cutting off the argument. "Mrs. Thornton is right. Samuel, your knowledge is valuable, but this mission needs an adult. Someone who can fight if necessary." "None of us know those trails," Peterson said. "Samuel's the only one who—" "Then Samuel rides with someone." Thomas looked at Clara. "A guide and a guardian. 2 riders are harder to catch than 1 anyway." Clara's face had gone white. "You want my son to—" "I want your son to help save this valley, including his mother's shop, including his baby sister's home." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to send him alone. I'm asking you to trust him, and to trust whoever rides with him." "Who?" Clara demanded. "Who would you trust with my son's life?" Thomas met her eyes. "I would trust myself, but I can barely stand. So I'll trust whoever you choose." The room fell silent. Clara looked at her son, at the determination burning in his young eyes. So like his father. So desperate to prove himself. "I'll go." A new voice. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was a young man Clara barely recognized. Edgar Wade. Cornelius Wade's own son stood at the edge of the crowd, hat in hand, face pale with something that looked like fear. "I know what my father's done. I know what he's planning." Edgar's voice shook, but he didn't look away. "He's going to burn out everyone who won't sell. The Thorntons are next. He told me last night." "Why should we trust you?" Peterson's voice was hostile. "You're his son." "Because I'm sick of watching him destroy people." Edgar's eyes found Clara's. "Mrs. Thornton, your husband used to buy supplies from my father's store. He was always kind to me. Always treated me like a person, not like Cornelius Wade's heir. When he died, my father laughed. Said one less debtor to worry about. Clara felt her hands ball into fists. I know the trails too, Edgar continued. I used to ride them as a boy, before my father decided I needed to learn the business instead of wasting time on horses. I can get your son to Millbrook, and I can make sure my father's men don't follow. How? Because they'll be looking for me. Edgar's smile was bitter. I heard my father's plans last night, and I stole his ledgers. The ones that document every bribe, every threat, every family he's destroyed. He doesn't know I have them yet, but he will soon. And when he does, he'll send every man he has after me. Edgar reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound book thick with papers. Between Mr. Caldwell's water rights documents and my father's own records, we have enough to put him in prison for the rest of his life. He held the ledger out to Thomas. Take it, use it, and let me help undo some of the damage he's caused. Thomas accepted the ledger slowly, his eyes never leaving Edgar's face. You know what this means. You're betraying your own father. My father stopped being my father a long time ago. He's just a monster who happens to share my blood. Clara watched the exchange, her mind racing. Edgar Wade turning against his own family. It could be a trap, a way for Cornelius to get someone inside their planning. But the look in Edgar's eyes was one she recognized. Shame, self-loathing, the desperate need to prove that you're more than the circumstances that made you. Samuel. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you think? Her son looked at Edgar for a long moment. Then he nodded. Papa always said you can tell a man's character by how he treats people who can't help him. Mr. Edgar used to give me candy when no one was looking. Never asked for anything back. That was years ago, Clara said. People don't change that much. Samuel looked at his mother with eyes too old for his face. Not really. Clara felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Her son's life in the hands of her enemy's child. Everything riding on whether a young man's conscience was stronger than his blood. She looked at Thomas. He gave her the smallest nod. All right. The words felt like stones in her mouth. Samuel and Edgar ride at noon. The rest of us prepare for whatever Wade does when he finds out his son has betrayed him. The crowd began to disperse, everyone talking at once, making plans. Clara stood frozen, watching her son shake hands with Edgar Wade like they were soldiers going off to war. Thomas appeared at her elbow. You're doing the right thing. Am I, or am I sacrificing my son for a valley full of people who've treated us like dirt for 3 years? You're giving him a chance to be the man his father would have wanted him to be. Thomas's hand found her shoulder. That's not sacrifice. That's faith. Clara turned to face him. And if I'm wrong, if Edgar is lying and my son dies on some back trail because I trusted the wrong person. Thomas had no answer for that. Some risks couldn't be calculated. Some leaps of faith landed on solid ground, and some opened onto empty air. Mama, Grace tugged at Clara's skirt. Is Samuel going on an adventure? Clara knelt down, gathering her daughter close. Yes, baby, a very important adventure. Can I go too? No, sweetheart. This adventure needs you here. Someone has to help me take care of Thomas while he gets better. Grace considered this responsibility with the gravity it deserved. Okay, but tell Samuel he has to come back. I need him to read me stories. I'll tell him. Clara kissed her daughter's forehead. I promise. Across the room, Samuel was already helping Edgar study a hand-drawn map of the territory. Two boys from opposite ends of the world united by circumstance and something that might have been hope. Clara watched them and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The noon sun hung cold and pale in the winter sky when Samuel mounted his father's old horse and prepared to ride. Edgar sat astride a borrowed mare, the leather satchel containing both the water rights documents and his father's ledger secured across his chest. Stick to the trails I showed you. Samuel told Edgar, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew this land in his bones. If we see riders, we split up. You take the documents south to Miller's Creek. I'll lead them north. Splitting up is dangerous. Less dangerous than both of us getting caught. Samuel's jaw was set in a familiar line. The papers are what matter. Get them to Millbrook, no matter what. Clara listened to her 9-year-old son talk about strategy and sacrifice and felt something shift in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or grief for the childhood he'd never really had. Samuel. She stepped forward, taking his hands in her own. Come back to me. I will, Mama. He squeezed her fingers. I promise. Don't make promises you might not keep. Papa always said a man's word is his bond. Samuel's eyes met hers. I'm coming back. That's my word. Clara pulled him down from the saddle, wrapped her arms around him, and held on longer than she should have. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, could smell the soap she'd used to wash his hair that morning, could feel the fragile bones beneath his skin. Her son, her firstborn, riding into danger because his mother had saved a stranger's life. I love you, she whispered, more than anything in this world. I know, Mama. Samuel pulled back, his eyes bright. That's why I have to do this, to keep you safe. He climbed back onto his horse before she could respond. Edgar nodded once to Clara, a silent promise, and then they were gone. Two riders disappearing into the winter landscape, carrying the hopes of an entire valley on their young shoulders. Clara stood in the street long after they vanished, the cold wind cutting through her thin dress, her arms wrapped around herself like she could hold in the fear that threatened to consume her. Thomas appeared beside her, still unsteady but upright. He'll make it. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. Thomas's hand found hers. Sometimes belief is all we have. Clara turned to face him, this stranger who had crashed into her life and turned everything upside down. If anything happens to my son, then I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Thomas's eyes held hers. But nothing's going to happen. Samuel's smart. Edgar knows the territory, and Wade doesn't know they're coming. As if in answer to his words, a shout went up from the edge of town. Clara spun to see a rider galloping toward them, dust flying from his horse's hooves. It's Cornelius Wade, someone yelled. He's coming himself. Clara's blood turned to ice. Wade here now, before Samuel could get far enough away to be safe. Get inside. Thomas ordered, his hand going to the pistol someone had given him. All of you inside now. But Clara didn't move. She watched the approaching rider, counting the seconds, calculating how far Samuel could have gotten. Not far enough. Never far enough. Clara! Thomas's voice was urgent. Please. She let him pull her toward the shop. Let the door close behind them. Let the bolt slide home with a sound like a prison cell locking. Outside, Cornelius Wade's horse thundered to a stop in front of her building. And inside, Clara Thornton prepared to fight for everything she had left. Cornelius Wade didn't knock. He kicked the door so hard that the bolt tore through the frame, sending splinters flying across Clara's shop like wooden shrapnel. Grace screamed. Clara pulled her daughter behind her, shielding the child with her body, as Wade filled the doorway. He was a big man, barrel-chested and thick-necked, with eyes the color of dirty ice. Behind him, 4 men with rifles fanned out across the street. Where is my son? His voice was calm. That was the worst part. Clara had expected rage, shouting threats. But Wade spoke like a man discussing the weather, and that terrified her more than any explosion could have. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't. Wade stepped inside, his boots crunching on broken wood. Don't insult my intelligence, Mrs. Thornton. Edgar was seen leaving your shop an hour ago with a boy, your boy, and my ledgers. Thomas moved forward, positioning himself between Wade and Clara. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Wade. Caldwell. Wade's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I should have made sure you were dead. My men assured me the cold would finish what they started. Your men were wrong. Evidently. Wade's eyes moved past Thomas to Clara. You've caused me considerable trouble, Mrs. Thornton. I was content to let you fade away quietly. Default on your loan, lose your shop, disappear like all the others. But you had to play hero. I saved a man's life. You declared war. Wade's calm finally cracked something dark and ugly surfacing beneath. And you turned my own son against me. Edgar made his own choice. Edgar is a weak, sentimental fool who's been useless to me since the day he was born. Wade's hand shot out and grabbed Clara's arm, yanking her toward him. But he's still my blood, and no one takes what's mine. Thomas's pistol cleared the holster in one smooth motion. Let her go. Wade laughed. Actually laughed like Thomas had told a particularly good joke. You can barely stand Caldwell. You think you can outdraw my men? He jerked his head toward the street where his 4 gunmen had their rifles trained on the shop's windows. Put down your weapon before someone gets hurt. Let her go first. Thomas. Clara's voice was strained but steady. Don't. Listen to her. Wade's grip tightened on Clara's arm. She's smarter than you. Maybe. Thomas didn't lower the pistol. But I'm stubborn. The standoff stretched. Clara could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could hear Grace whimpering behind her, could see the calculation in Wade's eyes as he weighed his options. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Let her go, Wade. Harriet Crenshaw stood in the ruined doorway, a shotgun braced against her shoulder. Behind her, John Peterson and half a dozen other townspeople had emerged from their hiding places armed with whatever they could find. Rifles. Pistols. One man held a pitchfork like he meant business. Wade's expression flickered. Surprise quickly masked. Mrs. Crenshaw, I didn't realize you'd developed a spine. There's a lot you don't realize. Harriet's voice didn't waver. Now let Clara go, or I'll put a hole in you big enough to see through. You'd murder me in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. Self-defense isn't murder. You broke into this woman's home, threatened her child, assaulted her person. I'd say any jury in the territory would call this justified. Wade's grip on Clara loosened slightly. Not much, but enough for her to twist free. She stumbled backward, pulling Grace with her, putting the stove between them and Wade. You think this changes anything? Wade's calm was returning, but there was something brittle beneath it now. I own this town. I own the sheriff. I own the bank, the land office, the territorial judge. A few farmers with hunting rifles don't scare me. Maybe not. Thomas still had his pistol trained on Wade's chest. But the truth might. What truth? The truth in those documents your son is carrying to Millbrook right now. The water rights your men tried to steal from me. The ledgers documenting every bribe, every threat, every family you've destroyed. Thomas's voice hardened. By this time tomorrow, every newspaper in the territory will have copies. Your empire is about to collapse, Wade, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Something shifted in Wade's face. The mask slipped and Clara saw what lay beneath pure murderous rage. You think I'll let some newspaper destroy me? I built this valley. I made it what it is. Without me, every farm here would have failed decades ago. Without you, families like the Hendersons would still have their land. The Thompsons would still have their home. Clara found her voice, found her courage. My husband would still be alive. Wade turned to look at her. What? You think I don't know? You think I haven't spent 3 years wondering why William kept getting sicker while others recovered? Wondering why the mine foreman kept sending him to the most dangerous shafts, the ones with the worst air? Clara stepped forward, her fear burning away in the heat of long-suppressed fury. You wanted our land. The lot behind my shop, the one with the old well. You needed it for your railroad scheme. But William wouldn't sell. So you made sure he couldn't work anywhere else. Made sure the only job he could get was one that would kill him slowly. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and your son has the proof. Wade's composure shattered completely. He lunged toward Clara, but Thomas intercepted him, driving his shoulder into Wade's chest and sending them both crashing to the floor. The pistol went flying. Wade's men surged toward the door, but Harriet's shotgun blast into the ceiling froze them in their tracks. Next one goes through whoever moves first. On the floor, Thomas and Wade grappled like animals. Thomas was weaker still, recovering from his injuries, but rage gave him strength. He got his hands around Wade's throat, pressing down with everything he had. "You killed her husband." Thomas's voice was barely human. "You destroyed her family. You tried to kill me, and now you threaten her children." Wade's face was turning purple. His hands clawed at Thomas's wrists, finding no purchase. "Thomas, stop!" Clara grabbed his shoulder. "Thomas, don't. He's not worth hanging for." The words penetrated. Thomas's grip loosened just enough for Wade to gasp in a breath. "She's right." Thomas leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper only Wade could hear. "I'm not going to kill you. The law is going to do that for me. You're going to hang Wade, and I'm going to watch." He released Wade and staggered to his feet. Clara caught his arm, steadying him as the fever and exertion took their toll. Wade lay on the floor, sucking in air, his expensive suit covered in dust and blood. His men hovered in the doorway, rifles ready but unable to act with half the town pointing weapons at them. "This isn't over." Wade's voice was a ragged whisper. "Yes, it is." Thomas leaned on Clara, his strength finally failing. "Your son has betrayed you. Your crimes are about to be published, and this town has finally found its courage. It's over, Wade. You just don't know it yet." Wade struggled to his feet, murder in his eyes. But he was smart enough to recognize a losing position. He straightened his coat with exaggerated dignity and turned to face the crowd. "You'll regret this, every single one of you. When the railroad comes through, when this town grows, you'll beg me for forgiveness, and I won't give it. Get out." Harriet's shotgun was still trained on him. "Get out before I decide Clara was right about you killing William Thornton and make this personal." Wade walked out without another word. His men followed, backing away with their rifles still raised professional enough to cover their retreat. Clara watched through the shattered doorway as they mounted their horses and rode out of town, heading east. Toward Millbrook. Toward Samuel. "Oh God." Clara's knees buckled. "Samuel! He's going after Samuel!" Thomas caught her before she could fall. "He's on horseback. Samuel has an hour's head start and knows trails Wade doesn't. It's not enough. If Wade rides hard, then we ride harder." John Peterson stepped forward. "I know the eastern routes. If Wade takes the main road, I can cut through Henderson's old property and get ahead of him. I'll go with you." Another man, young and lean, pushed through the crowd. "My horse is the fastest in the county. So's mine." A third voice, a fourth. Within minutes, 6 men had volunteered to ride after Wade to protect Samuel and Edgar to make sure the documents reached Millbrook. They mounted up and thundered out of town before Clara could find words to thank them. "They'll catch him." Harriet's hand found Clara's shoulder. "Wade's horse is tired from the ride here. Our boys are fresh. They'll catch him." Clara wanted to believe it. Wanted to have faith in these people who had spent 3 years treating her like a pariah and were now risking their lives for her son. But faith was hard when your child was in danger. "Mama," Grace tugged at her skirt. "Is Samuel going to be okay?" Clara knelt down, gathering her daughter close. "Yes, baby. Samuel's going to be just fine." The lie tasted like ashes in her mouth. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara paced the shop, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything except the window and the empty street beyond. Thomas had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping fitfully in her bed while his fever spiked and fell. Harriet organized the other women to repair the shop's door, to clean up the debris from Wade's violent entrance, to prepare food that Clara couldn't eat. Grace played quietly in the corner, her rag doll clutched tight, her eyes following her mother's every movement. Reverend Abbott arrived at dusk, breathless from his journey. "I got word to the Caldwell Ranch before I heard about Wade. Nathan's bringing men. They should be here by morning." "By morning might be too late." Clara, the old minister took her hands in his. Have faith. I'm trying. Her voice cracked. But Samuel is out there, and Wade wants him dead, and I can't do anything except wait. Waiting is its own form of courage. Waiting is torture. Abbott had no response to that. Some truths were too raw for comfort. Night fell. The town gathered in Clara's shop, too wired with tension to sleep, too afraid to be alone. They lit candles against the darkness and spoke in hushed voices about what Wade might do, what the future might hold, whether they had made the right choice in standing against him. Around midnight, the sound of hoofbeats made everyone freeze. Clara was at the window before anyone else could move. A single rider approached, moving fast, pushing his horse hard. Too small to be Wade. Too small to be any of the men who had ridden out. Her heart stopped. Samuel. She was out the door before anyone could stop her, running toward the approaching rider, her skirt tangling around her legs, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Samuel! Samuel! The horse pulled up and her son slid from the saddle into her arms. He was shaking, his face streaked with tears and dirt, but he was alive. Alive and whole, and here. Mama! His voice broke on the word. Mama, I'm sorry. Sorry, baby. What are you sorry for? Clara pulled back, searching his face for injuries. Are you hurt? Where's Edgar? He made me go back. Samuel's words tumbled out between sobs. Wade's men caught up to us at Miller's Creek. 6 of them, maybe more. Edgar said I had to run, had to get back and warn everyone. He said he'd hold them off. Clara's blood turned to ice. Edgar stayed behind. He had a pistol. He told me to take the satchel and ride. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out the leather bag containing the documents. I didn't want to leave him, Mama. I didn't want to, but he pushed me onto my horse and slapped its flank, and I couldn't stop. Shh. Clara pulled him close, feeling his small body shake with guilt and fear. You did the right thing. You did exactly what you had to do. But Edgar made his choice, a brave choice. Clara's throat tightened. Whatever happens, that's not on you. Thomas appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. The documents... safe. Samuel held up the satchel. All of them. Edgar's ledgers, too. Then it wasn't for nothing. Thomas met Clara's eyes over Samuel's head. Whatever happened to Edgar, it wasn't for nothing. Clara nodded, but the weight of it pressed down on her. Edgar Wade, barely more than a boy himself, had sacrificed everything to make up for his father's sins. Had possibly died doing it. We need to get these to Millbrook. Thomas took the satchel from Samuel with hands that trembled slightly. If Edgar bought us time, we can't waste it. I'll go. John Peterson stepped forward. He had returned an hour earlier, having lost Wade's trail in the darkness. My horse is rested. I can make Millbrook by dawn if I ride hard. Wade's men are still out there. Then I'll go around them. Peterson's jaw set with determination. That boy died to get these papers out. I won't let that be for nothing. He mounted up and was gone before anyone could argue, disappearing into the night with the documents that could bring down an empire. Clara stood in the street, her son in her arms, watching until the hoofbeats faded to silence. Behind her, Thomas had sunk onto the porch steps, his body finally giving out. Come inside, she told Samuel. You need to rest. I can't sleep, Mama. Every time I close my eyes, I see Edgar's face. I know. Clara guided him toward the door. But you're safe now. That's what matters. Samuel stopped pulling back to look up at her. Is that what matters? What do you mean? Edgar said something before he made me go. He said that being safe didn't mean anything if you couldn't live with yourself. Samuel's young face was too old, too knowing. He said his father taught him that by accident, that Wade spent his whole life making himself safe, and now he was the loneliest person in the valley. Clara had no answer for that. Some wisdom came too early, and there was no protecting children from the truths they stumbled upon. "Let's get you inside. We can talk more in the morning." But Samuel wasn't finished. "Mama, do you think Edgar's dead?" The question hung between them, heavy and terrible. "I don't know, baby. I hope not." "Me too." Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. "He was nice to me, even before all this when nobody else was. He used to save me the good candy, the kind his father imported from back east. I remember. You told me. I never told him thank you. Not properly." Samuel's eyes glistened. "I should have told him." Clara knelt down, taking her son's face in her hands. "If he's alive, you'll get the chance. And if he's not—" Her voice caught. "If he's not, then you carry that gratitude with you. You become the kind of person who deserves what he did for you." "How do I do that?" "By being brave. By helping others, even when it costs you. By standing up for what's right, even when everyone else stays silent." Samuel nodded slowly, processing this with the solemnity of someone much older. "Like you did," he said, "when you saved Thomas. Like we all did. Today. Together." They went inside, Clara supporting her exhausted son Thomas, struggling to his feet to follow them. The shop was crowded with people who should have been home in their own beds, but had stayed because community meant something again. Because one woman's choice to save a stranger had reminded them who they wanted to be. The night wore on. Samuel fell asleep on a pile of blankets by the stove, Grace curled beside him, their hands intertwined, even in dreams. The adults kept vigil in shifts, watching the windows, waiting for news, waiting for dawn. Thomas sat beside Clara on the narrow bench by the door, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should sleep." "So should you." "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment. "Samuel's an extraordinary boy. He's too young for any of this." "Maybe, but he rose to meet it anyway. That says something about how he was raised." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The endless exhaustion, the fear, the guilt of putting her children in danger, it all pressed down on her at once. "I keep thinking about William," she whispered. "About what he would say if he could see this. His children running from gunmen, his wife harboring strangers, his shop turned into a fortress. What do you think he'd say?" Clara considered the question. William, with his gentle hands and tired eyes. William, who had worked himself to death for a dream of something better. William, who had loved her with everything he had and left her with nothing but memories and debts. "I think he'd be proud." The word surprised her. "He always said I was stronger than I knew. I never believed him. Maybe he was right." He was definitely right. They sat in silence after that, watching the darkness through the window, waiting for the light. At some point, Clara's head dropped onto Thomas's shoulder. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. When dawn finally broke, it brought with it the sound of many hoofbeats. Clara was on her feet immediately, her hand finding the rifle she'd kept close all night. Thomas rose beside her, swaying slightly, his face pale but determined. Through the window they could see riders approaching. Not 6 like Wade's men. Not a dozen like Nathan's expected reinforcement. 30 at least. Maybe more. "Who?" Clara began. The lead rider came into focus, and Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Nathan!" He stumbled toward the door. "That's Nathan. And half my ranch hands. And—" He stopped, squinting. "Are those federal marshals?" Clara followed him outside the cold morning air, hitting her like a slap. The riders pulled up in front of the shop, a wall of men and horses that stretched across the entire street. Nathan dismounted. First, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile when he saw Thomas alive. His hands moved in rapid signs that Clara couldn't follow, but Thomas clearly could. "They arrested Wade." Thomas translated, his voice thick with disbelief. "An hour ago at his ranch. Federal marshals out of Helena. Apparently the territorial judge sent them as soon as he received copies of the documents." Copies. Clara's mind raced. But Peterson only left last night. There's no way. Not Peterson. A new voice, familiar and impossible. Edgar Wade stepped out from behind the wall of horses. His arm was in a sling, his face battered and bruised, but he was alive. Alive and smiling. Edgar. Samuel burst from the doorway, nearly knocking the young man over with the force of his hug. You're alive. I thought we all thought. I almost wasn't. Edgar's good arm wrapped around Samuel. Wade's men got a few good hits in before the Peterson riders caught up. But it turns out 6 against 8 are bad odds, especially when 3 of your 6 don't really want to fight. What do you mean? My father's men. Edgar's smile faded. Some of them have been looking for a way out for years. They just needed an excuse. When Peterson's group showed up, half of Wade's men threw down their guns and surrendered. And the documents? I had copies made before we left Redstone, sent them with a different rider, one who took the main road while Samuel and I took the back trails. Edgar shrugged, wincing at the movement. If my father taught me anything, it's to always have a backup plan. Clara stared at this young man who had thought 3 steps ahead, who had risked his life to undo his father's evil, who had protected her son with cleverness as much as courage. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. Edgar's expression grew serious. My father's arrested, but he has money influence. The trial could take months, and he'll do everything he can to destroy the people who brought him down. Let him try. Thomas's voice was stronger than it had been in days. He's already lost. The documents are public. The evidence is damning. And this town... He gestured at the people who had gathered in the street, who had risked everything to stand against Wade. This town isn't afraid of him anymore. Harriet Crenshaw stepped forward, shotgun still in hand, but pointed at the ground now. Mr. Caldwell's right. We've been cowards for too long, letting Wade bully us into submission. That ends today. She turned to face the crowd. Whatever comes next, we face it together. As a community, the way we should have been all along. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered townspeople. Clara saw faces she recognized, people who had snubbed her for years, now looking at her with something like respect. Something like shame. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. What happens now? Samuel asked, still standing close to Edgar. Now. Thomas looked at Clara, at her children, at the town that had finally found its spine. Now we rebuild. All of us. Together. The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist, painting the snow-covered street in shades of gold. Clara stood in front of her battered shop, surrounded by people she was only beginning to know, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not certainty, not safety. Just hope, fragile and precious, and terrifying in its intensity. Thomas's hand found hers. She didn't pull away. It's not over, she said quietly. No, he agreed. But the worst is behind us. Clara looked at her children. Samuel grown old overnight. Grace still clutching her doll, but smiling now, actually smiling, and allowed herself to believe it might be true. The worst was behind them. And whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The federal marshals took Cornelius Wade to Helena in chains 3 days after his arrest. Clara watched from her shop window as the prison wagon rolled through Redstone, flanked by armed riders, carrying the man who had destroyed so many lives toward a justice long overdue. Wade's eyes found hers as the wagon passed. He didn't look defeated. He looked patient, like a man who believed this was merely a temporary setback. He's gone. Thomas appeared at her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. It's over. Is it? Clara didn't look away from the departing wagon. You saw his face. He thinks he's coming back. Men like Wade always think that, right up until the rope tightens. Clara finally turned from the window. Thomas looked better than he had in days, still pale, still moving carefully. But the fever had broken and his strength was returning. Nathan had brought a doctor from the Caldwell Ranch who had properly treated his wounds, replacing Clara's makeshift bandages with professional care. The trial could take months, she said, and Wade has friends in Helena, money, influence. He also has enemies, people he's wronged who've been waiting years for a chance to testify against him. Thomas's hand found the small of her back, a gesture that had become natural between them. The evidence is overwhelming. Edgar's ledgers alone document enough crimes to hang him 3 times over. And if he gets off, if he buys his way out, then we deal with that when it happens. Thomas turned her to face him fully. Clara, you've been carrying this weight for days. Let yourself breathe. I don't know how. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. 3 years of survival, of fighting, of refusing to let herself feel anything except the next problem that needed solving. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt lost. Adrift without an enemy to focus on. You learn. Thomas's voice was gentle. Day by day you remember what it feels like to not be afraid every waking moment. It takes time. Is that how it was for you? After Catherine? The question was bold. Too personal maybe for their fragile new understanding. But Thomas didn't flinch. After Catherine, I forgot how to breathe for 2 years. Forgot how to eat, sleep, feel anything except the cold. I buried myself in work because movement was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. He paused, something shifting in his eyes. I didn't start learning to breathe again until I woke up in your bed with your daughter offering me her doll. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thomas, I'm not asking for anything. He stepped back, giving her space. I'm just telling you the truth. You saved more than my life, Clara. You reminded me that I still had one. Before she could respond, the shop door burst open and Grace came tumbling in her doll, dragging behind her. Mama, Samuel says I can't help with the barn, but I want to help. Clara knelt to meet her daughter's indignant gaze. What barn, sweetheart? The new one. Mr. Nathan says they're building us a new barn because the old one burned down and Samuel gets to help carry nails. But Samuel says I'm too little. Clara looked up at Thomas, who was smiling for the first time in days. Nathan took it upon himself to organize a work crew, he explained. Half the town volunteered. They've been out at your property since dawn. My property, but I didn't. You didn't have to ask. Thomas's smile widened. That's rather the point. Clara rose slowly, her mind struggling to process this information. People were building her a barn. People who had refused to sell her flour 2 weeks ago were now giving up their Saturday to construct a building on her land. I don't understand. What's to understand? You saved my life. I was carrying documents that saved their livelihoods. They're grateful. Grateful people don't build barns. They say thank you and go back to their lives. Maybe in some places. Thomas offered his arm. Want to go see for yourself? They walked to the Thornton property together, Grace skipping ahead, Thomas moving slowly but steadily. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of winter day that promised spring wasn't far behind. Clara heard the worksite before she saw it. Hammers ringing against wood. Men shouting instructions. The general organized chaos of a community project. She crested the small rise that marked the edge of her land and stopped dead. There were at least 30 people there. Men raising walls, women preparing food over open fires, children running errands and getting underfoot. The skeleton of a barn, larger than her old one, was already taking shape where the charred remains had stood just days ago. Mama, look, Grace pointed. There's Mrs. Crenshaw. Harriet Crenshaw was indeed there, directing traffic with the same imperious manner she used to manage her general store. When she saw Clara approaching, she handed her clipboard to a younger woman and walked over. Mrs. Thornton, I was wondering when you'd show up. Mrs. Crenshaw. Clara struggled to find words. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just accept it." Harriet's voice was gruff, but her eyes were kind. "Lord knows you've earned it." "I haven't earned anything." "You saved a man's life when any sane person would have left him to freeze. You stood up to Wade when the rest of us were too scared to look him in the eye. You raised 2 children alone in a town that treated you like dirt." Harriet's jaw tightened. "If that doesn't earn a new barn, I don't know what does." Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of Harriet Crenshaw. She would not. "The food's over there." Harriet continued, apparently deciding the emotional moment had lasted long enough. "Make yourself useful if you can't sit still. God knows we have enough men standing around pretending to work." She strode off, barking orders at a group of teenagers who were supposed to be carrying lumber. "She likes you," Thomas observed. "She has a strange way of showing it." "Most people do." His hand found hers. "Come on, let's see how your barn is progressing." They walked through the worksite together, and Clara experienced something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. People greeted her by name. Men tipped their hats. Women smiled and asked after the children. It was as if her 3 years of exile had been erased overnight. Samuel found them near the water pump, his face flushed with exertion and pride. "Mama, did you see I helped with the foundation this morning? Mr. Peterson said I'm a natural with a hammer." "Did he now?" Clara pulled her son into a hug, breathing in the smell of sawdust and sweat. "I'm proud of you." "Mr. Peterson says the barn should be done by next week if the weather holds. And Mr. Nathan says—" Samuel stopped, his expression suddenly uncertain. "Mr. Nathan says we might need a bigger barn if you and Mr. Thomas get married." Clara's face went scarlet. Thomas made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. "Samuel James Thornton, that is not an appropriate thing to say. Why not everyone's talking about it?" Samuel's confusion was genuine. Jimmy Tate's mama told Mrs. Henderson that it was only a matter of time before the widow Thornton became Mrs. Caldwell, and Mrs. Henderson said, "I don't need to hear what Mrs. Henderson said." Clara's voice was strangled. "Go help with the lumber, now!" Samuel shrugged and ran off, completely unaware of the chaos he'd left behind. Thomas cleared his throat. "So, that's what people are saying." "Apparently." "How do you feel about it?" Clara turned to face him, this man who had crashed into her life and turned everything upside down. He stood there in borrowed clothes, still too thin, still healing, but looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It's been less than 2 weeks since I pulled you out of the snow." "I know. 2 weeks isn't enough time to—" She stopped, frustrated. "I don't even know your favorite color." "Blue." Thomas's lips twitched. "Like your eyes when you're angry, which is most of the time." "I'm not angry." "You're a little angry." Clara felt her mouth curve into an unwilling smile. "Maybe a little. For what it's worth, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But I'm not going to pretend I haven't thought about it, haven't imagined what it might be like to wake up with you beside me, to watch Samuel and Grace grow up, to build something together instead of just surviving alone. You don't even know me. I know you saved my life when it would have been easier to let me die. I know you stood up to the most powerful man in the territory to protect a stranger. I know you've raised 2 remarkable children through poverty and grief and the cruelty of small-minded people." Thomas reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "What else do I need to know?" Clara caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. "Everything. You need to know everything. The way I burn dinner more often than not. How I talk in my sleep. That I cry when I'm angry and laugh when I'm sad. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced that William is still beside me. I'd like to learn all of that. It takes time. We have time." Thomas's thumb traced her cheekbone. "For the first time in years, we have time." Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She thought of William, of the love they'd shared, of the man who had worked himself to death trying to give her a better life. She thought of the 3 years since, of the loneliness and the struggle and the moments when she'd wanted nothing more than to lie down and not get up again. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "I know. But I might be. Someday. Then I'll wait." Thomas pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and undemanding. "However long it takes." They stood there for a moment, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives, not rushing toward anything, but not running away either. Just standing. Together. "Mama!" Grace's voice shattered the moment. "Mama, come quick." Edgar's horse came back without him. Clara's blood went cold. She and Thomas ran toward the main road, where a cluster of people had gathered around a riderless horse. It was definitely Edgar's mount. Clara recognized the distinctive white blaze on its forehead. "Where is he?" Thomas demanded. "Where's Edgar?" "Nobody knows." John Peterson's face was grim. "Horse came trotting in about 5 minutes ago. No sign of the boy." "He was supposed to be at your ranch," Clara said to Thomas. "Under Nathan's protection." "He was." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Nathan!" The deaf foreman appeared, his weathered face troubled. His hands moved rapidly in signs that Clara couldn't follow, but Thomas could. "Edgar left the ranch this morning," Thomas translated. "Said he needed to take care of something. Nathan assumed he was coming here." "Take care of what?" Clara asked. "He didn't say." A terrible suspicion began to form in Clara's mind. Wade's ranch. That's where he went, isn't it? To his father's property. Why would he go there? Because it's still his home. Because everything he owns is there. Because... Clara stopped, a new thought striking her. Because his mother is buried there. Silence fell over the group. Wade's wife had died when Edgar was young. Clara remembered hearing about it years ago, before Wade became the monster everyone feared. "He went to say goodbye," she said quietly. "Before his father hangs, before everything changes, he went to say goodbye to his mother." Thomas was already moving toward his horse. "I'll go after him." "Thomas, you're not strong enough." "I'll go after him," he repeated, his voice brooking no argument. "That boy saved Samuel's life. Saved all our lives. I'm not leaving him alone out there." "Then I'm coming with you." Thomas started to protest, but Clara cut him off. "Don't. Don't tell me to stay behind where it's safe. I'm done being safe while other people fight my battles." She turned to Harriet. "Mrs. Crenshaw, can you watch the children?" Harriet nodded, her face grim. "Go. We'll hold things down here." Clara kissed Grace quickly, hugged Samuel, and mounted up beside Thomas. They rode out together, pushing their horses hard toward the Wade property, neither speaking, but both knowing that something was wrong. That Edgar wouldn't have let his horse go unless he couldn't stop it, unless someone had stopped him. They found him in the Wade family cemetery, kneeling beside his mother's grave. He wasn't alone. 3 men stood around him in a loose circle, guns drawn. Clara recognized them from the night Wade had stormed her shop, men who had been loyal to Cornelius Wade, who had fled before the federal marshals arrived, who apparently had scores to settle with the son who had betrayed their employer. "Stop right there." One of the men spun toward Clara and Thomas, his pistol rising. "Come any closer and the boy dies." Thomas reined his horse to a halt, his hand hovering near his own weapon. "Easy. Nobody needs to die here. Tell that to Mr. Wade. He's going to hang because of this little traitor." The man spat on the ground near Edgar's knees. "Least we can do is make sure the bloodline ends with him." Edgar looked up. His face was bruised, they'd beaten him already, but his eyes were calm. Too calm, Clara thought. The eyes of someone who had accepted what was coming. "Let them go," Edgar said quietly. "Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Caldwell have nothing to do with this. This is between me and my father's men." "Shut up!" The lead gunman backhanded Edgar across the face, sending him sprawling. "You don't get to make demands, boy. You sold out your own blood." My blood sold out everyone in this valley decades ago. Edgar pushed himself back up, blood dripping from a split lip. I'm just trying to even the scales. Clara dismounted before Thomas could stop her. She walked toward the group, slowly, hands raised, heart hammering against her ribs. Mrs. Thornton, what are you doing? The lead gunman tracked her with his pistol. I said stop. I'm not armed. Clara kept her voice steady. And I'm not leaving without Edgar. Then you're not leaving. Then shoot me. Clara stopped 5 feet from the nearest gunman, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. Shoot an unarmed woman in front of witnesses. Add murder to your list of crimes. Give the federal marshals another reason to hunt you down. They're already hunting us. For assault. For conspiracy. For working with Wade. Clara's chin lifted. Murder is different. Murder means you hang too. Is that what you want? To die alongside the man you served? The gunman wavered. Behind him, Clara saw Edgar's eyes widen. He was trying to signal something, but she couldn't read what. You should listen to her. Thomas had dismounted too, was approaching from the other side. Wade's finished. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Your only chance is to disappear, start new lives somewhere far from here. You can't do that with murder charges following you. And if we let the boy go, what then? Then you ride away. Right now. No one follows you. Thomas's voice was calm, reasonable. Edgar won't press charges for the beating. Will you, Edgar? No. Edgar's voice was hoarse. Let me bury my mother in peace, and we're done. The 3 men exchanged glances. Clara could see them calculating, weighing their options. Violence or escape? Revenge or survival? How do we know you won't send the marshals after us? You don't. Clara met the lead gunman's eyes. But I give you my word. The same word I gave when I pulled Thomas Caldwell out of the snow. The same word I've kept to my children every day since their father died. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not trust exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of a person whose promises meant something. Fine. He holstered his pistol. We're done here. They mounted their horses and rode away without another word, disappearing into the tree line like ghosts. Clara waited until she couldn't hear hoofbeats anymore before letting herself breathe. Edgar. She knelt beside him, helping him sit up. Are you hurt? Besides the obvious? Nothing permanent. Edgar touched his split lip, wincing. Stupid of me to come alone. I knew they might be watching the property. Why did you... Edgar looked at the simple headstone behind him. Because I needed to tell her I was sorry. For taking so long to stand up to him. For letting him hurt people for years, while I looked the other way. His voice cracked. She was a good woman, my mother. She died trying to protect me from his rages. I think she'd be proud of what I finally did. I wanted her to know. Clara thought of William. Of all the things she'd wanted to tell him after he died. All the words that came too late. She knows, Clara said softly. Wherever she is, she knows. Edgar nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Thornton, I don't know how to thank you for coming after me, for everything. You don't need to thank us. Thomas helped the young man to his feet. You're part of this now, part of the community you helped save. That means we look out for each other. I betrayed my own father. You stood against evil. There's a difference. Clara touched Edgar's shoulder. Your father made his choices. You made yours. Don't let his sins define you. They helped Edgar mount behind Thomas. His own horse was somewhere nearby, probably grazing, and rode back toward Redstone. The sun was setting by the time they reached the worksite, painting the skeleton of Clara's new barn in shades of gold and rose. Samuel came running the moment he saw them. Edgar, you're okay. The boy threw his arms around Edgar the moment he dismounted, nearly knocking him over. I was so scared when your horse came back without you. I'm fine. Edgar ruffled Samuel's hair with genuine affection. Just had some unfinished business to take care of. Grown-up business. The worst kind. Samuel nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. That night after the workers had gone home, and the children were asleep, Clara sat on her porch with Thomas. They didn't speak for a long time, just watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "You were brave today," Thomas finally said. "I was terrified." "That's what brave means. Being terrified and doing it anyway." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, too tired to maintain propriety, too grateful for his warmth to care what anyone might think. What happens now? Wade's trial, rebuilding, figuring out what comes next. Thomas's arm came around her, pulling her closer. "Does that answer your question?" "Not really." "Good. I don't have better answers." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But we'll figure it out. Together." Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the smell of sawdust and pine, feeling the steady beat of Thomas's heart beneath her cheek. "Together," she echoed. It wasn't a promise. Not yet, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Spring came to Redstone like a promise kept. The snow melted. The creek behind Clara's property swelled with fresh water, and her new barn stood proud against the clearing sky. 3 months had passed since Thomas Caldwell had nearly died in her alley, and everything had changed. The trial of Cornelius Wade ended on a Tuesday morning in April. Clara learned the verdict from Edgar, who had traveled to Helena to witness his father's judgment, and returned looking both relieved and broken. Guilty on all counts. Edgar stood in Clara's shop, hat in hand, his young face aged by the weight of what he'd witnessed. Murder, fraud, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang. Clara set down her sewing and gave him her full attention. "How do you feel?" "I don't know." Edgar's voice was hollow. "He's my father. I wanted justice, not—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Not his death." "Is that wrong? After everything he did?" Clara thought of William, of the slow poison that had stolen him from her while Wade counted his profits. She thought of the Thompson family burned out of their home. She thought of all the people Wade had destroyed in his quest for power. "It's not wrong to mourn the father you wished he had been," she said finally. "That's not the same as mourning the man he was." Edgar nodded, slowly processing this. "He asked about me, before the sentencing, asked the guards if I had come." "Did you see him?" "No." Edgar's jaw tightened. "I couldn't. I thought I could face him, tell him why I did what I did. But when the moment came, I just—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I'm a coward." "You're human." Clara rose and crossed to where he stood. "Edgar, you saved this valley. You gave up everything, your inheritance, your name, your family, to do what was right. That's not cowardice. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." "Then why do I feel so empty?" "Because doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels necessary." Clara touched his arm gently. "Give yourself time. The emptiness will fade." The shop door opened, and Thomas entered, stomping mud from his boots. He'd been spending most of his time at his own ranch lately, getting his affairs in order, but he rode to Redstone every few days to check on Clara and the children, to check on her if she was being honest. "Edgar." Thomas nodded at the young man. "I heard about the verdict. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He deserved it." Edgar straightened, pulling himself together with visible effort. "I should go. I need to figure out what to do with the estate. The lawyers say most of it will go to paying restitution to the families my father harmed. And you? I'll keep enough to start over somewhere, maybe California." Edgar managed a small smile. "I hear they don't care much about your past out there." "You could stay here," Clara offered. "Build something new in the valley you helped save. Maybe someday, but right now, I need distance." Edgar put on his hat. "Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Caldwell, thank you for everything." He left before either of them could respond. A young man carrying the weight of his father's sins on shoulders, too young for such burdens. Clara watched him go, her heart aching for him. "He'll be all right," Thomas said, reading her expression. "He's stronger than he knows." "I hope so." Thomas moved closer, and Clara felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his presence always brought. 3 months of shared meals, of conversations that lasted until midnight, of moments that hovered on the edge of something more without ever quite crossing the line. She was ready to cross it now. She just didn't know how to say so. "I have something for you." Thomas reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "I should have given it to you weeks ago, but the lawyers needed time to make it official." Clara took the paper, unfolding it with careful hands. Her eyes scanned the legal language, trying to make sense of the formal phrasing. "Thomas, this is the deed to your property, free and clear." His voice was gentle. "Wade held the mortgage, which means his estate owned your debt. As part of the restitution process, I was able to purchase it. You bought my debt. I canceled it. The property is yours, Clara. No strings attached, no obligations. Whatever happens between us, your home belongs to you and your children forever." Clara stared at the document in her hands. The paper that represented 3 years of fear, of counting every penny, of lying awake at night, wondering if tomorrow would be the day she lost everything. Gone. Just like that. "I can't accept this." "You can. You will." Thomas's hand covered hers. "You've spent 3 years carrying burdens that should never have been yours alone. Let me carry this one." "Thomas, I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not trying to buy your affection or obligate you to me. I'm giving you this because you deserve it. Because William would have wanted you to have security. Because those children need to know their home is safe." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "Why are you so good to me?" "Because you were good to me first." Thomas wiped her tears with his thumb, his touch impossibly gentle. "Because you pulled a dying stranger out of the snow and gave him back his life. Because you stood up to a tyrant when everyone else looked away. Because you raised 2 of the finest children I've ever known." He paused, his voice dropping. "Because I love you, Clara. I have for a while now." The words hung between them, fragile and enormous. "I love you too." Clara hadn't planned to say it, hadn't known she was going to until the words left her mouth. But the moment they did, she knew they were true. Had been true for weeks, maybe longer. Thomas's face transformed. The careful control he always maintained cracked open, revealing something raw and hopeful and afraid. "Clara, I'm not ready to get married." She pressed a finger to his lips, stopping him before he could speak. "Not yet. I need more time. But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to stop waiting and wondering. I would have waited forever. I know. That's why I'm telling you now." Clara smiled through her tears. "Ask me again in 6 months. I think my answer might be different." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her like she was something precious. Clara pressed her face against his chest and let herself be held for the first time in 3 years. 6 months, he murmured into her hair. "I can wait 6 months." "You'd better." He laughed a real laugh, surprised and joyful, and Clara felt something unlock inside her. A door she'd sealed shut after William's death opening to let in light she'd forgotten existed. The shop door banged open, and Grace came running in, followed by Samuel at a more dignified pace. Mama, look what Mr. Nathan taught me." Grace held up a piece of wood carved into a rough approximation of a horse. "I made it myself. It's beautiful, sweetheart." Clara pulled back from Thomas, wiping her face quickly. Not quickly enough. "Mama, why are you crying?" Grace's face crumpled. "Did something bad happen?" "No, baby." Clara knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. "Something good happened. Something very good." Grace looked between her mother and Thomas, suspicion dawning in her young face. "Are you going to get married?" Grace Elizabeth Thornton. Clara felt her face flush. That's not we haven't. I told her you would, Samuel said from the doorway. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. I told her months ago. And how did you know that, young man? Because you look at Mr. Thomas the way you used to look at Papa. Samuel's eyes met Clara's, too old for his face. And he looks at you the same way. Clara felt her heart crack open all over again. Her son, who had lost his father at 6, who had watched his mother struggle and suffer, and refused to break, who had carried burdens no child should carry, her son had noticed. Come here, she said softly. Samuel crossed the room and let his mother pull him close. For a moment, he was just a boy again, small and vulnerable in her arms. I miss Papa, he whispered. I know. I miss him too. But I think he'd want you to be happy. Samuel pulled back, looking up at her. I think he'd like Mr. Thomas. Clara glanced at Thomas, who was watching the exchange with suspiciously bright eyes. I think he would too. Grace tugged at Clara's skirt, demanding attention. Mama, if you marry Mr. Thomas, can I call him Papa? I don't remember much about real Papa anymore. The words were innocent, but they hit Clara like a physical blow. Her daughter, who had been barely 3 when William died, was forgetting him. Forgetting the man who had loved her, held her, sung her to sleep. Grace. It's okay, Grace. Thomas knelt beside Clara, bringing himself to the child's level. Your real Papa will always be your Papa no matter what. But if your mama says yes someday, I would be honored to be part of your family. We can figure out what to call me together. Grace considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old wrestling with life's big questions. Can I call you Papa Thomas? That way I have 2 papas. That sounds perfect to me. Grace beamed and threw her arms around Thomas's neck. Over her head, his eyes met Clara's, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. The grief he still carried for his own daughter. The hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel. The love that had grown quietly, steadily in the spaces between words. Thank you, she mouthed. He just smiled and held her daughter tighter. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Clara Thornton became Clara Caldwell in a ceremony that half the valley attended. Harriet Crenshaw had organized everything from the flowers decorating the church to the feast that followed. The woman who had once refused Clara service now fussed over her wedding dress like a devoted aunt, adjusting seams and smoothing fabric until everything was perfect. You look beautiful, Harriet said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. William would be proud. You knew my husband. Not well, but I remember how he looked at you, like you were the sun, and he was just grateful to be warm. Harriet's voice softened. Thomas looks at you the same way. Some women are blessed once in that regard. You've been blessed twice. Clara smoothed the front of her dress white because Thomas had insisted, because he wanted to see her in it regardless of what tradition said about widows. I'm nervous. Of course you are. Marriage is terrifying. Harriet squeezed her hands. But it's also the bravest thing you'll ever do. Opening your heart to someone knowing they could hurt you, choosing to trust anyway, that takes courage. I've had practice being brave. Yes, you have. Harriet's eyes glistened. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry it took the rest of us so long to see it. Clara hugged her, the woman who had been her tormentor and had become against all odds her friend. We're ready for you, Mama. Samuel appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but proud in his new suit. At 10 years old, he was already showing signs of the man he would become. Clara saw William in his eyes, in his stubborn jaw, in the way he squared his shoulders against the world. How do I look? Ooh, beautiful. Samuel offered his arm with exaggerated formality. Papa would say so too. You remember that? I remember everything about Papa. Samuel's voice was steady. I'll remember him forever. But I'm glad Mr. Thomas is here now. He makes you smile again. Clara took her son's arm and let him lead her to the church doors. Grace waited there, clutching a basket of flower petals with fierce concentration. Don't mess up, Grace, Samuel warned. You have one job. I know. Grace stuck her tongue out at her brother. I practiced 100 times. Children. Clara's voice held a smile. Behave. They entered the church together, mother and children walking toward a new future. Clara saw familiar faces in the pews, John Peterson and his wife, Reverend Abbott, in the front row, Nathan standing stoically beside Thomas at the altar. Even Edgar had returned from California for the occasion, looking healthier than when he'd left, the shadows lifting from his eyes. And Thomas. Standing at the altar in a dark suit, his face alight with something that made Clara's breath catch. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room, like she was everything. The ceremony was simple as Clara had wanted. Reverend Abbott spoke of love and loss and second chances, of finding light in darkness and hope in despair, of the courage it took to love again after grief. When the time came for vows, Clara spoke from her heart. Thomas, I came to you broken. 3 years of fighting alone had worn me down to nothing. I didn't believe I could feel anything again, didn't want to, because feeling meant risking pain. She took a shaky breath. You showed me that the risk was worth it. That opening my heart didn't mean losing myself. That I could honor what I had with William while building something new with you. Thomas's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady when he responded. Clara, you saved my life. Not just the night you pulled me from the snow, but every day after. You reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of joy and love and hope. You gave me a family when I thought that possibility had died with Catherine and Lily. He took her hands in his grip warm and sure. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of your courage, of your trust, of the chance you're giving me to love you and your children. Our children, Clara corrected softly. Our children. Reverend Abbott pronounced them married, and Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that made Clara's heart overflow. Behind them, the congregation cheered. Grace threw flower petals in the air, most of them landing on Samuel's head. After the ceremony, after the feast, after they had accepted congratulations from what seemed like every person in the valley, Clara and Thomas stood alone on the porch of her shop, their shop now watching the sun set over the mountains. Mrs. Caldwell. Thomas tested the name like a new flavor. It suits you. Clara Thornton Caldwell, if you don't mind. I'm keeping both names. Wouldn't have it any other way? Inside, they could hear the children laughing with Nathan, who was teaching them some kind of hand signal game. The sound of joy, pure, uncomplicated joy, filled the small space. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Clara admitted. For this to fall apart somehow. Happiness feels dangerous. I know what you mean. Thomas pulled her closer. After Catherine, I was convinced that loving anything would just lead to losing it. I spent 5 years keeping everyone at arm's length. What changed? A stubborn widow refused to let me die. Thomas kissed her temple, and then refused to let me push her away, and then somehow made me believe that I deserved to be happy again. You do deserve it. We both do. Yes. We do. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives and built something new from the pieces. Behind them, the past waited with its grief and its regrets. Ahead, the future stretched with its uncertainties and its promises. But in this moment, there was only now. Only this. Clara leaned into her husband's warmth and felt for the first time in years completely whole. 2 years later, Clara stood in the same spot, watching a different sunset. So much had changed that sometimes she barely recognized her own life. The dress shop had expanded into a proper storefront with 3 seamstresses working under Clara's direction. The Caldwell Ranch had merged with the Thornton property, creating a spread that rivaled anything Wade had ever owned. Samuel was 12 now, tall and serious, already helping Thomas with the cattle. Grace was 7, still clutching her worn doll, but increasingly interested in the horses. And in Clara's arms a baby slept, Margaret Rose Caldwell, named for Thomas's first wife, and Clara's mother. 3 months old and already the center of everyone's world. She has your eyes. Thomas appeared beside her, his movements easy, with the confidence of a man who had finally found peace. She has your stubbornness. Fair enough. They watched their daughter sleep, her tiny fist curled around Clara's finger. A new life built from old grief. A hope they hadn't dared to imagine. Do you ever think about how close we came to missing this? Clara asked. If Samuel hadn't found you that day, if I had listened to the people telling me to let you freeze, if we had given up when things got hard. I think about it every day. Thomas's arm came around her, encompassing both Clara and their daughter in his embrace. And every day I'm grateful that you were too stubborn to listen. Stubborn. That seems to be the word everyone uses about me. It's a compliment. Clara laughed, a sound that came easily now after years of forgetting how. Thomas Caldwell, you are a strange man. Strange enough to marry you. Strange enough to love you until my last breath. He kissed her forehead gently. Strange enough to believe that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Inside the house, Samuel was reading to Grace from one of the books Thomas had ordered from back east. His voice drifted through the open window, patient and steady, teaching his sister the way he'd once been taught. Family, Clara thought. Not the one she'd been born into, not the one she'd built with William, but something new. Something forged in fire and loss, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Happy? Thomas asked. Clara looked at her husband, at the baby in her arms, at the home they had created together from the ruins of their separate griefs. She thought of William, who would always have a place in her heart. She thought of Catherine and Lily, whose memories Thomas carried with love instead of pain. She thought of all the roads that had led them here to this moment, to this life they shared. Yes, she said simply. Finally, completely yes. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the distance, cattle lowed. Closer by, children laughed. And on the porch of their home, Clara Caldwell held her daughter and leaned into her husband's warmth, and knew, with a certainty she had never felt before, that she had found her place. Not because a man had rescued her, not because fate had intervened, but because she had made a choice on a frozen winter night to reach out her hand to a stranger, because she had refused to let fear or grief or the cruelty of small-minded people define her, because she had been brave enough to love again, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Some stories begin with tragedy and end in sorrow, but others, the best ones, begin with courage and end with joy. This was one of those stories. Clara Thornton Caldwell had saved a dying stranger and lost everything she thought she knew. In return, she had gained a husband who adored her children, who thrived, a community that had learned to stand together, and a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine. She had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbowed. And that made all the difference.